This analysis was written during the 2023 WGA and SAG-AFTRA strikes. Without the labor of the writers and actors currently on strike, Star Trek wouldn't exist, and I fully support their want for a fair deal regarding the incredible work they do. Everyone deserves to be compensated fairly, and AI can't replace artists. There was no way I wasn't going to talk about this episode. Sped up releases and delayed planes be damned, I was going to talk about this episode. After a year of hype, it's finally here. We're looking at the Strange New Worlds Lower Decks crossover, Those Old Scientists. Hello, geeks, freaks, and all those unique. This is Emcee Frodis. Obviously, this is the first time I've talked about Strange New Worlds this season. At least over on this channel. I've been talking about it an awful lot over on Strange New Pod, the Star Trek podcast I co-host. I was so worried about when the Lower Decks crossover was going to be released. I thought I was free and clear when I realized it would be the week after San Diego Comic-Con. Of course, that was a dumb thought for me to have because, of course, they were going to release it during San Diego Comic-Con, where I was for the first time. And plane delays meant I wasn't able to make the pod episode. So, fuck you very much, Air Canada. Not going to lie, I actually cried in baggage claim about having to miss the podcast. Thankfully, I do have this very channel where I can talk about whatever the hell I want. It's already been nearly a week since the episode was released, and I don't want to do just another review. We all know how everyone felt about this episode. It was pretty much a flawlessly executed crossover. There's really not much more I can add. This was god-tier level Trek. If I'm not going to be talking about it with my friends, doing a review really isn't what I'm interested in. But just because I'm not going to gush about the episode doesn't mean I don't have a lot to say about it. One of the great things about this episode is that it isn't just a silly piece of fluff connecting two Treks together. This episode matters, not just in terms of Strange New Worlds Season 2, but Lower Decks Season 3 and beyond, and Star Trek in general. First of all, the choice of title says a lot about this episode. Those Old Scientists. This is based off a joke from Season 1, Episode 10 of Lower Decks, No Small Parts. Commander Ransom says that Kirk and Spock come from the TOS era, meaning those old scientists. This is, of course, a meta-joke about how the original Star Trek is abbreviated to TOS, meaning the original series. The thing is, from the viewer point of view, Boimler and Mariner aren't even visiting the TOS era. They're visiting the SNW era, because viewers tend to delineate based on the shows. But really, Boimler lumping Kirk and Pike into the same era makes complete sense. He's from over 100 years in the future. Kirk and Pike are separated in command by only about 5 years. There is absolutely no in-universe reason to think of them as different time periods. It's like thinking of George Washington and James Madison being presidents in the same era, when in actuality, they became president 20 years apart from one another. Sorry, I just saw Hamilton a few weeks ago. A Founding Fathers reference is actually pretty off-brand for me, but it fits in this context. But by calling this the TOS era, it firmly establishes everything from early Discovery until the movies as a period within the Star Trek timeline. For all of those folks who try to discount them, they are canonically given their proper spot. There have now been references to Worf, Riker, and the Bell Riots within Strange New Worlds. We also have Boimler pointing to a Strange New Worlds exclusive character and saying, "Lieutenant Ortegas, you're a war hero." It's not just the characters who will go on to serve under Kirk who have made an impact on history, but this time we are seeing right now unfolding on screen. But probably the biggest thing that came out of this episode had nothing to do with the spectacle, as is what it does for the characters. First, I think it's important to state that Boimler and Mariner visiting 2260 was entirely a predestination paradox. Boimler says that at the beginning of the episode, the last time the portal was active was 120 years ago, which was when he went through. He just didn't know that yet. Tendy's story of Orion's scientists discovering the portal also does not happen without Boimler's intervention. This experience with Boimler and Mariner is a turning point for a lot of characters. These two come back in time with expectations of a majority of the crew. When they don't meet it, Boimler and Mariner are disappointed. But they do help plant the seeds that will make them those very people. God bless Bradward Boimler, because season 2 has absolutely been Spock's flop era, and he needed it pointed out. Seeing him smiling in this episode was one of the most frightening things I've ever seen. And that's because of how unnatural it was. That's not just because it was Spock smiling. It was an unnatural smile. Ethan Peck has a fucking beautiful smile. And I don't even think it's as Boimler said that Spock doesn't know how to. We've seen Spock smile, and it's been actually very charming. It's because he's forcing himself to smile, because he thinks that's who he has to be right now. Spock is a dramatic little shit, and he doesn't do things halfway. He throws himself fully into experimenting with being more human, whatever the fuck that means, and it's always an experiment. Something he's just kind of trying out, and Chapel is content to let him experiment on her. And that's really not a good basis for a long-term relationship. So I know some people might be asking, what is the difference between Spock being in a relationship with Chapel and Kelvin Spock being in a relationship with Uhura? And I think the difference is where Spock is coming from. Now, we don't know everything that formed Kelvin Spock. Personally, I don't think he had the huge falling out with Michael in that reality, but I'm not going into that because I have a tens of thousands of word fanfic that does. Kelvin Spock doesn't feel the same pressure to be one or the other. He's not Vulcan or human separately, but instead he's just Spock. Someone who does allow himself to feel these deep emotions, including romantic ones for Uhura. Which is why that relationship has lasted over 5 years, and when we last saw them in the comics, they were discussing marriage. Everything with Chapel has been more of a, well, let's see if these emotions take. This is entirely the reason why Chapel didn't want to tell the higher-ups about their relationship in translation. She's trying to have fun with Spock's experimentation, but she can see the end in the future. There is a lack of actual emotional honesty going on. Boimler talking to Chapel about what Spock is like in the future is really just telling her everything she already knows. That what's going on between her and Spock is not something that's going to last. I do have to say, just on a review point, I really wish Boimler had been able to fit in something about, oh, my friend Tendi worships you, to Chapel. Lady had an amazing career in Starfleet Medical and was even the CMO of the Enterprise for a while. But, you know, another episode where Chapel's story revolves solely around Spock. Must be Thursday. But Boimler's intervention is important to Spock. Because Boimler's right. Spock does go on to do incredible things that he has to be the person we see in the original series for. Which is not the person he is now. I would also like to say that I don't think the lack of Chapel in the books about Spock actually means that this experience was unimportant to him. It's just that the experience between the two of them is something they don't feel the need to share with the galaxy at large. I do think there will be some importance because Spock is not someone without emotions. He never has been. But I think what he's going to learn is that he needs to be true to himself, and what is true to him is the guy we see later on in the original series. Mariner's interactions with Uhura follow a similar general idea as Boimler's with Spock. Mariner has this image of her that Uhura hasn't become yet. The thing that we know as the audience is that Mariner's view of Uhura is not all that inaccurate. We see who Uhura is going to become, a hyper-competent badass who knows how to have a good time. But the Uhura we are seeing throughout Strange New Worlds is freshman Uhura. She is laser-focused on the job, because it's a very hard job to do, and Uhura isn't confident in her abilities yet that she can take the time to have fun. The lack of self-confidence is clear in Uhura being utterly intimidated by Mariner's hero worship of her. And like I said, Mariner doesn't even say anything that isn't true. Nor does she even give a lot of details about Uhura's career. She doesn't talk about her eventually becoming a captain, which we find out in Picard, nor any specific encounters with anyone. All Mariner says is that she's good at what she does and that she has a good time. But Mariner and Boimler, even just knowing who she is intimidating to her. Unlike with Spock, I have absolutely no issues with how they've been portraying Uhura in Strange New Worlds, other than the hyper focus on the tragic losses she's experienced. Come on, guys. Let's let Uhura do something else. This feels like a very natural progression for her. Remember when we're introduced to her in Children of the Comet? Uhura isn't even sure she wants to be in Starfleet. But now that she is sure, she's throwing herself into it wholeheartedly because she wants to prove that even though she wasn't sure to begin with, she's absolutely dedicated to it. As Ortega says, Mariner is a good bad influence. Because Mariner, for all of her flouting of authority, is a very talented officer. She could easily climb the ranks if she wanted to, which I don't think she really wanted to until the end of season 3, but more on that later. And Uhura being able to have a good time is not only important for her mental health, but to her place on the ship. Uhura is the heart of the crew in the original series, but the only way she gets to that point is by being able to take the time off work so she can connect to those around her, something we know she's been struggling with because of the tremendous losses she's suffered from. Of course, Mariner might have something to do with how Uhura doesn't get promoted in the time Kirk is captain. Nah, I'm blaming Kirk for that. And 60s sexism. Spock and Uhura are the biggest impacts Boimler and Mariner have, but they're not the only ones. Pike says outright that Boimler's fanboying gives him hope for his future, which right now seems pretty bleak. Because Pike is in the moment, he doesn't think about the legacy he's going to be leaving behind. He is the captain of the flagship. Just because his career is being cut short doesn't mean that all of the stuff he's done up until then won't be remembered. And it's going to be even bigger than he knows. He didn't even find out about the holiday or the Christopher Pike Medal of Valor. What happened with number one is really the most emotional of all of the connections that happen, because it's the one that we, as the audience, have absolutely no context for. Spock, Uhura, Pike, they are characters we see in the future, and when Boimler and Mariner speak about them, they're speaking for the audience as well. But Una has been a question mark for decades. We have absolutely no idea what'll happen to her, and a lot of people have been worried about her safety in Strange New Worlds. Una's reaction to Boimler and Mariner is a nod to that. The brilliant thing is, we still don't know if she's destined for doom by the end of this episode. That question isn't answered. But like Pike, she leaves a legacy behind. Aside from Una's Illyrian heritage, the thing that has absolutely defined her character over The Cage, Discovery, and Strange New Worlds is her professionalism. She is the consummate Starfleet officer, and Starfleet's going to recognize that by using her to recruit people. We know that it brought Boimler to Starfleet, and that he's so desperate to impress her that he doesn't want to be out of regs with his uniform in front of her. Una as the poster woman for Starfleet fits totally in my narrative of her inspiring Julian Bashir to join. But in all of the setting up of legacy for characters, I am incredibly worried about La'an. She is about the only character Boimler doesn't have a strong reaction to, despite hearing her last name. And we're not going to say he was able to cover up because the boy has no game face. I just can't shake the feeling that something is going to happen to La'an to keep her on the down low in terms of history. Maybe it's not something tragic. Maybe she just ends up in Black Ops or leaves Starfleet entirely. Still, it stood out as something that we should keep an eye on. But this episode really wasn't just about the Strange New Worlds cast. Our focal characters were Boimler and Mariner, and I think this experience is going to define who they are going forward. As we see them in lower decks, they are the peons doing the drudge work on a ship that's not well respected in Starfleet. And then they come back in time and meet these legends they've looked up to their entire lives. And they're just people. If Boimler and Mariner met these old scientists, and they were actually the height of legend, I think it would have been a lot easier for them, and they wouldn't have experienced their quarter life crises. Because it's not about everyone not living up to their expectations, it's that they're just people, the same as them. But they do go on to do all of these tremendous things. Boimler and Mariner feels there's no way they can live up to it. But the thing is, they already are. We've seen all of the stuff they've been doing on the Cerritos, and they're already making names for themselves among the Galley class. 100 years down the road, their exploits are going to be as legendary as Kirk, Picard, any of them. They just don't know it yet, the same way the crew of the Enterprise here didn't know what their futures held. I think this is going to have a major impact on Boimler and Mariner going forward. According to the Stardate, this happens right after Here I'll Trust Nothing. I think this can explain the whole thing as impacting Mariner's arc in the final episodes of season 3. Having this crisis is of what she's going to do with her life because she met her idol and devoting herself to Starfleet, but then experiencing rejection because no one believes she's serious, so she tries something else, only to realize that yes, absolutely, Starfleet is where she's supposed to be. I've said before that it's high time that the ensigns and lower decks receive promotions, and it's hinted in the trailers we might be getting at least a tease of the idea. And this experience is one that will resonate through Boimler and Mariner going forward in their careers. So not only was this an event for the audience in terms of two casts coming together, but a definitive point in the lives of all of the characters involved, and it'll affect all of history. I'm sure Temporal Investigations absolutely hated everything about this. So comment down below with your thoughts on those old scientists. If you like my videos, subscribe to my channel. I do videos about Buffy, Doctor Who, Marvel, Star Trek, Star Wars, and lots of other geeky things. Also, if you like my Star Trek content, please check me out on Strange New Pod. We go live Thursdays at 9:30 Eastern. If you want to support me, please visit my Patreon. You can also buy me a coffee, or you can go to my Redbubble and TeePublic to buy my geeky graphic designs. Today, I'm wearing my fanfic trope shirt. You can find me on all platforms, as well as most social media, as Emcee Frodis. So until next time, live long, and may the Force be with you.